Welcome to Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm your host, Laurie Fagen. In this podcast series, I'll interview authors who will then read from their mystery, suspense, or thriller short stories or a chapter from their published books. In addition, sprinkled throughout the coming weeks, the podcast will feature radio theater-style sections from the audiobooks for my crime fiction novels. We're back with the thrilling conclusion and final episodes of the fun radio theater-style mystery Art of the Steal from my crime fiction novel Bleeder. I'm still pumped from the weekend. Tonight I just need to edit the next podcast episode. I fade in the murder mystery theme music, then lower it as my recorded voice begins. You're listening to a Murder in the Air mystery theater podcast called Art of the Steal. I'm your host, Lauren Price. After getting the latest report from the medical examiner, Detective McCullen brings in two female artists with long hair from the gallery who match the pawn shop owner's description. Mac lets Armida Murrieta, the watercolor painter with lengthy brown hair, sit alone in one interrogation room, while Nasha Benali, the Native American painter with long braids, waits in another. He brings in Richard Coleman from the lobby, and they take seats on either side of the detective's messy desk.
So, Mr. Coleman, is there anything else you'd like to tell me about your dealings with Paolo Romano?
Mac leans back in his rolling chair, which squeaks as it settles into place.
No, I've told you everything I know.
Coleman fidgets a bit.
Why am I here?
Well, we found out a few more details that are quite interesting.
Mac watches the artist closely. Coleman blinks a few times and runs his hand through his spiky hair.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Mac leans forward, chair squeaking again, and wakes up his computer by shaking the mouse device.
We found a series of curious deposits in your bank account over the last few months.
Coleman's eyes widen as he looks at McCullen, then down at his hands. He gulps, but says nothing.
And you can cut the phony English accent. We know you were born and raised in Terre Haute, Indiana.
How? Where?
Coleman can barely get the words out, but they're spoken in a plain Midwestern dialect.
Oh, you did a pretty decent job of scrubbing most of your records, but birth certificates are harder to tamper with.
Mac flips open his notepad, searching for a page.
But you need to get to better tea.
Coleman's face bunches up in confusion.
Huh?
I had a great aunt who lived in London most her life. True Brits drink Yorkshire tea from Taylor's, or PG Tips, even Twinings. Red Rose is a Canadian tea.
Mac lets that sit in the air for a moment.
I actually hate tea. I only drink it when I'm out, and even then I put a lot of milk and sugar in it.
He looks up at the detective.
Look, there's no harm claiming to be from somewhere else. People here thought it was unique, and it set me apart from all the others.
I get it. But you didn't really have many sales at the gallery, did you? According to Romano's records, you sold 2 pieces over the past year. Not exactly a primary contributor to the gallery's success. So where'd you get the extra grand in cash every month? Always deposited in your bank's ATM at about 3:30 in the morning.
Paolo was such a lousy businessman, he didn't even miss the money. Plus, he left the cash box code on a piece of paper on his desk.
The artist rubs his hands back and forth.
I knew he was skimming extra dough off some of the other artists. And what he charged for that tiny studio space was outrageously high. So after Art Walk, when the gallery would usually have a decent night, I'd come in and take some of my rent money back.
Including the morning after Romano was killed? You two get into it? Did he catch you with your hands in the till and you killed him?
No!
Coleman's fair face reddens.
I mean, I can see how it might look, and yes, I came in around 3 for cash, and I saw him there on the floor. He was already dead. I had nothing to do with it.
Why didn't you call 911?
Coleman shakes his head.
I knew it would look too suspicious. I panicked, took the money, and ran.
He looks at the detective, beseeching.
Gotta believe me, I didn't kill him.
Mac looks at the artist through narrowed eyes.
Jameson!
The tall officer strides to the men from across the room.
I've got to hold you for a few hours while I talk to a couple more artists.
What? Am I under arrest?
Not yet, but we're talking theft, maybe embezzlement, And depending on what else I find out, possibly murder.
Mac turns to Jameson.
Take Coleman downstairs and get a search warrant for his house to look at the bottom of all of his shoes.
With Coleman protesting, Jameson leads the man away. I edit in the music full, then under my last line as the host. The plot continues to thicken. Find out what the other artists say next time on Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. Thanks for listening. This is Lauren Price. Mysterious music fades up full and under, then my voice. Welcome back to Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm Lauren Price. Tonight on Art of the Steal, our detective is learning more about the artist's involvement in the gallery owner's dealings and about the death of the owner. From a one-way mirror, Detective McCullen watches the two female artists sitting alone in interrogation rooms. Watercolor artist Armida Murrieta is sitting calmly, relaxed, occasionally sipping from a foam cup. Native American painter Nasha Benali can hardly sit still in her chair, wringing her hands, adjusting her thick eyeglasses, her eyes darting around the room. Mac decides to start with her.
I didn't do anything. Honestly, I didn't.
Nasha cries out as the detective comes through the door. Mac's eyebrows arch. He stands imposing on the other side of the table.
Why don't you tell me exactly what really happened the night Paolo Romano was killed?
Like I told you before, Paolo came in around 8:30 that night and said he would close up. I was glad to leave early as I had to study for a test that night, and the closing routine always takes at least half an hour.
And you said he was meeting someone there, right?
Yes, but in my excitement to get out of there before he changed his mind, well, what I didn't tell you is that I got almost all the way home and realized I'd forgotten my bag and had to go back.
Oh, aye?
Mac takes out his notepad.
What happened then? What'd you see?
Well, you know my eyesight isn't so good. Fetal alcohol syndrome from when I was a baby is why. And my glasses were in my bag, so were my gallery keys, which is why I came in the front. I heard Paolo arguing with a woman. My hearing isn't so good either, so I'm not sure who it was. But then someone went running down the hallway and the back door beeped open and slammed shut.
Aye? Then what?
I called out to Paolo, but he didn't answer. I went into his office, and he was acting funny, like he was drunk or something. I just figured he'd had too much wine from Art Walk that night. I got my bag and left.
You said he often yelled at you and would lower your commissions. Weren't you mad at him enough to give him a wee little push and knock him down to kill him?
Nasha's mouth drops open, wordless, her small eyes widened behind the thick lenses.
No, of course not. He was stumbling around, holding onto the desk, but he was alive when I left.
A tear slides down her light brown cheek. Mac nods his head slowly.
Stay here. I'll be back shortly.
The Mystery Theater theme music fades in as I read. Is the Native American painter portraying the precise picture? What will the calm watercolorist's account be? Stay tuned when the next podcast of Murder in the Air Mystery Theater continues. I'm Lauren Price. Thanks for listening. The haunting theme song for Murder in the Air Mystery Theater begins. I lean into the microphone and read from my script. Good evening. I'm Lauren Price. Tonight on Murder in the Air Mystery Theater, the continuing saga of the Art of the Steal, there's one more suspect to be questioned in the gallery owner's murder. Detective Liam Mac McCullen enters the interrogation room where watercolor artist Armida Murrieta sits calmly.
Thanks for coming in, Miss Murrieta.
Am I under arrest?
The artist's cool gray eyes show neither fear nor nervousness.
Is there reason for that?
Mac takes a chair opposite the slight woman who sits casually in her seat, hands folded on the tabletop.
Of course not.
Mac pulls a plastic evidence bag from his pocket.
So, we found a long hair matching yours at the scene of the crime. Did you have words with Mr. Romano for his not paying you on time for your art sales?
Sure, we had words all the time, but it never changed anything. I was in his office a lot. One hair doesn't prove anything.
A pawn shop owner says you came in with the Coleman piece, saying it was worth $50,000. When he said he'd give you $20, you left in a huff. He found the painting in his dumpster the next day. You were working with Romano on an insurance fraud scheme, weren't you?
Armida looks down at her hands, then straight back up at the detective.
And I strangled him, too.
Mac's eyebrows rise.
But it was all a ruse. The deal was, I'd pull a picture wire around his neck, just long enough to leave a mark. He'd say someone came up from behind. He passed out, and the painting was stolen. He'd file an insurance claim, and we'd split the money. He was alive when I left.
Then why'd you go to the pawn shop?
She shrugs her shoulders.
I figured I could get more money for myself and be ahead of the game. Turns out the art wasn't worth crap.
Mac drums his thick fingers on the table.
I think you were so angry at Romano, your emotions got the better of you, and you strangled him to death.
The artist scoffs and shakes her head.
Now, why would I do that? I'd never get my portion of the insurance money. You're going down the wrong path, detective.
Armida Murrieta, you're under arrest for attempted theft. You have the right to remain silent.
The theme music fades in, followed by my voice. At least 3 suspects, but no clear case of who done it. How will Detective McCullen solve the case of the gallery owner's murder? Don't miss next time when Murder in the Air Mystery Theater continues. Thanks for listening. This is Lauren Price. The Murder Mystery Podcast theme music fades in, followed by my voice. Welcome back once again to Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm Lauren Price. We're nearing the thrilling conclusion of Art of the Steal, where there are many suspects in the death of art gallery owner Paolo Romano, but no clear story as to exactly how he died and who killed him. Detective McCullen knocks on medical examiner Charlotta Finster's open office door. Her wild gray curls bounce as her head turns toward him.
Got a minute, Finn?
The deep circles under the lawman's eyes reflect the long hours and stress of not solving his homicide case.
Come on in.
Finster leans back in her motorized scooter's seat, which also serves as an office chair, and holds her hands on her lap.
You don't look so good, Mac.
She gestures for him to sit. The big man wearily eases his bulky frame into the padded leather armchair. He surveys the ME's crowded but neat room. Books are packed onto shelving units on 2 walls, and stacks of neatly organized files line up in a row on top of a filing cabinet. A ghoulish skeleton hangs from a metal stand in one corner, staring blankly at the detective.
I'm a bit knackered, I don't mind saying. It's just not adding up. I've got at least 3 suspects, but I can't pin anything on any of them.
Charlotta opens a manila file folder from the top of her desk.
Tell me what you know so far.
Mac reads Romano Paolo upside down on the folder's tab.
One female artist says she saw Romano around 9 p.m. acting funny, staggering around. She figured he was drunk and says he was alive when she left. A sculptor fingered another female painter who says she and Romano had concocted an insurance fraud scheme. She admitted she was supposed to make it look like he was strangled, steal the painting, then he would split the insurance money with her. She says she also left him alive or else she wouldn't get her cut. A male artist was stealing cash from Romano every month, but says Romano was already dead when he came in around 3 a.m. Turns out he was the one who left the partial bloody shoe print, but my texts say the coagulated blood was at least 5 hours old, which fits with this timeline. What am I missing here?
Finn nods her head and thumbs through the papers in Romano's file. She finally looks back at McCullen.
You say an artist thought he had been drinking?
Yeah, it was one of those art walk nights, and she figures he had helped himself to plenty of the wine they were supposed to be serving to the patrons.
He pulls out his notepad, flips a few pages, and reads.
She says he was stumbling around, holding on to the desk. That means something to you?
The medical examiner works her teeth over her lips for several seconds, thinking.
I believe so.
Theme music from the Mystery Theater fades in full, then under my voice. What is the medical examiner's theory as to how the gallery owner died? Be sure to listen to the final episode of Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm Lauren Price. Good night. The podcast theme music fades in and under, and the narration begins. You're listening to a Murder in the Air Mystery Theater podcast. This is the final episode in the tale of Art of the Steal, where Detective Liam McCullen gets assistance from medical examiner Charlotta Finster to help solve the case of the dead gallery owner. Detective McCullen's eyes widen and he leans forward in anticipation toward the medical examiner.
Sure, and you think you know what happened?
Yes.
She closes Paolo Romano's file.
I believe the artist who was in on the insurance fraud scheme coordinated with Mr. Romano to wrap the metal hanging wire around his neck long enough to leave a mark, but not strangle him. However, she pulled hard enough to nearly make him pass out. When she left, he was alive, but the lack of oxygen could have made him appear drunk. So when the other artist saw him staggering in his office, it was because he was just regaining full consciousness.
Aye, but what happened next? How did he die?
I'm getting to that. Your male artist, who left the bloody shoe print, your technicians are correct that he stepped in the blood long after our victim had died.
Aye, and?
And you've never found a blunt object to explain the blow to his head, is that correct?
Right, but...
So I think shortly after your second artist saw him staggering around in his office, he lost consciousness and fell. I did observe hair and skin matter on the corner of Mr. Romano's desk, so chances are good he hit his head on the corner of the desk. Head wounds create a great deal of blood because the face and scalp contain so many blood vessels close to the surface of the skin. He most likely bled out in a short period of time.
Max sits, stunned, taking this all in.
That is completely mental. So if he didn't die from strangulation, but by hitting his head, it's not murder. And while there was premeditation, the artist wasn't planning to kill him. So I don't think I can even get attempted murder to stick. Bollocks.
Mac shakes his head in disgust.
The charges are not my business, Mac. I'm just here to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. I will be noting the cause of death as from a blow to the head following a fall.
Mac nods and rises from the chair.
You're sound as a pound, Finn. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Mac. I appreciate that. Really.
The Mystery Theater theme music begins. My voice returns. So it looks as if our unscrupulous art gallery owner died when the scheme he concocted with another artist went south. The watercolor artist Armida Murrieta put the wire around Paolo Romano's neck to fake strangle him. Then she left with Richard Coleman's painting. A brief lack of oxygen caused the gallery owner to be dizzy, which is when artist Nasha Benali saw him appearing drunk. Romano fell, hit his head, and bled out. Richard Coleman snuck in to steal money, accidentally stepped in Romano's blood, and fled. Since the Coleman painting was recovered, Mac had to drop the attempted theft charge against Armida Murrieta. This concludes this latest podcast called Art of the Steal. I'm Lauren Price, your host. Other voices in this show were performed by
Leroy Timblin,
Tess Jenkins,
Anne Vidian,
Andrea Ballou.
David Speck.
Thanks for listening, and be careful. There might be murder in the air. Good night. Actors portraying the characters in Art of the Steal from the crime fiction novel Bleeder were Leroy Timblin, Tess Jenkins, Anne Vidian, Andrea Ballou, and David Specht. And I read the narrator part of Lauren Price. Audiobook theme music composed by Laurie Fagen of Mountain Sound Recording Studio, Sonda, Norway. Murder in the Air podcast theme music, sound effects, mixing and mastering by Devin J. Hancock of Tempe, Arizona at devinjhancock.com. Next time on episode number 25 of Murder in the Air Mystery Theater, we'll talk with novelist Susan McNabb, who has a memoir called The Opposite of Famous, about her modeling and Xtra career, and who also writes cozy mysteries and romance. Then on episode number 26, come back when I'll read from my short story, Mystery in MB, from the Sisters in Crime Los Angeles chapter anthology, Entertainment to Die For. If you're listening on the podcast platform of your choice, please subscribe and leave a review or provide us with feedback. If you're on YouTube at Read Laurie Fagen, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and click on the bell to be notified when a new episode has been released. And for freebies, check out our Patreon page at Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. For more information, you can visit readlauriefagen.com. Thanks so much for listening, and come back again, where you will always find Murder in the Air.